This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Well, welcome everybody, thank you very much for coming. I'm delighted to see so many here. Our lecture today is this year's lecture in a series that we've been running some time between the Institute of Classical Studies and the British School at Rome. Occasionally people say that for the humanities, our libraries are our laboratories, and that's probably true, which is why the ICS has a library upstairs in partnership with the Hellenic and Roman societies. But we need some other infrastructure as well to do what we do, and a really key part of that infrastructure are the British schools and institutes abroad. We have a number of partnerships with the British School at Athens, with other institutes, and particularly with the British School at Rome. We're very grateful to the British School at Rome, among other things, for suggesting today's speaker, Paolo Vitti, who I'll introduce in a moment. Having schools abroad enables us not only to go and spend pleasant times in the sun, which of course we all enjoy doing, and to benefit from better patterns available even in Bloomsbury, but it also allows us to make contacts and connections with other scholars who work in the Roman Empire more generally, and particularly in the city of Rome. The Roman Society Roman Archaeology Conference next year will take place in Rome as part of a partnership between the BSR and La Sapienza, along with the Roman Society. Countless people in this room looking around, I recognise faces have spent time working there, as I have, working in the library, but most of all working with colleagues in Rome and working with Italian colleagues and colleagues in other foreign schools. So it's a good moment, I think, to reflect and celebrate the importance of the British schools and institutes abroad, and particularly the British School at Rome, in our collective scholarship, and scholarship that begins as graduate students and carries on to the most senior level. Making connections is what classics is all about. It's not a narrow discipline, it's never a national or individual discipline, and it's a particular nice connection that we make with people who are not, to begin with, classicists. That's an enormous pleasure to welcome as the speaker nominated by the British School at Rome this year, Dr. Paolo Vitti. Paolo Vitti is an architect, first and foremost. He has won enormous numbers of awards and honours, and particularly I'd like to draw attention to his winning of the Europa Nostra Prize last year for restoration work. He's done restoration work in Greece, he's worked in Cyprus, and he's worked in many parts of Italy, as well as in the city of Rome. As well as a practicing architect, he's a teacher and runs courses, particularly advanced courses, for students in Rome, and travels widely giving lectures. It was one of those lectures that he gave at the British School at Rome, which so impressed the director and others there, that when he and I were talking about who we might invite this year to come and speak at the ICS BSR lecture, Paolo's name immediately came up. I was very pleased to write to him and got immediately an enthusiastic reply, which is wonderful, and it's been a great pleasure to have him here, and I know other people in the audience have already benefited from his company and from his wisdom and an interesting conversation about anecdotes that have come up in the course of his work. Having someone who's a practicing architect look at these buildings is quite different from that having an archaeologist, but I think it's fair to say that Paolo walks quite happily in both worlds, both the archaeological and the architectural world, as well as in the world of architectural practice and at the university. So it's an enormous pleasure, a great privilege to introduce Paolo Vitti to give this year's BSR ICS lecture. Paolo, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these kind words. It's an emotion for me, of course. Although I'm traveling all around giving lectures, it's always an emotion to have a lecture here. And I'm going to make this proposal for this reconstruction, new reconstruction of the Mausoleum of Hadrian. But first of all, I want to thank Christopher Smith for proposing me and for you for inviting me. And this work began, it was a suggestion of Filippo Quarelli and Eugenio Losardo. At the time, we were thinking about the exhibit that took place past year in Rome, Apotheosis, the Uomini a Dei in Mausoleum of Hadrian. We added this part because at the very beginning it was only apotheosis, and then they suggested, why don't you try to understand what was the Mausoleum of Hadrian? And this was an ideal condition because I was not forced at all. There was not a client asking me to make a research or to study, just looking at the mausoleum. And it took me around 4 years measuring with total station, that kind of tools we use architects, and looking at the structure. It's a very difficult structure. As you know, it's one of the mysterious architectures of Rome. If you go through the literature, you don't find much information about the original architecture. So it was their suggestion that took me to go through the mausoleum, the Castel Sant'Angelo, and at the end of this process came out some discoveries that I'm going to show you today. And so the exhibit, there was this addition that was Il Mausoleo di Hadriano, and that's what will be today. So this, as you know, the Mausoleum of Hadrian was built on the right bank of the river Tiber, and it was built, it was, let's say, inaugurated after the death of the emperor by Antoninus Pius. And it was a kind of imposing architecture. This is the very famous model made by Gismondi at Palazzo della Civiltà Romana. We transformed the layout of the mausoleum with the new reconstruction. However, the mausoleum had more or less some 60 burials, and then after less than 100 years it was not used anymore for burials, and then began its new story that is related to the construction of the fortification of Rome under the Aurelian walls, and later with the phase of Honorius. We don't know exactly when it was became part of the fortification, but my suggestion, it was a very early stage, since it was the head of the bridge, and it was a perfect place for any enemy to go against the town. That is that later it began to be more and more a defense point for the city. It was used in the medieval period like a tower. There was the Torre di Crescenzi above it. And so these transformations began to be added step by step and transforming the mausoleum to something new, that is the Castel Sant'Angelo. As Boatwright, who dedicated to the architecture of Hadrian in Rome a book in 1987, she said, yet the reconstruction of the mausoleum's original appearance, particularly in the upper story, is notoriously difficult. And it is so, because when we enter inside, what we see is clearly the Roman part in the lower part, but once we go up, this, the ancient structures are hidden within the structure of the castle. So what I am proposing you is to go all through these hidden parts and try to unveil what was the original architecture. There are two key points that will be treated. The first one is how it was possible to reach the top part of the mausoleum, and the second one is, as you see on the very top, there was a kind of rotunda. And the second is to understand how was the architecture, the exterior architecture. There are many, many, many studies, and as we can see, they are a little bit confused. But the first reconstruction, let's say, of the mausoleum dates to 1445 by Filarete. It is in the bronze door of St. Peter's, and it's a very interesting reconstruction, because it gives some points that are very important. There is a square basement on the bottom part of the mausoleum. Then there is a circular colonnade that is on the second, on the upper level, when the mausoleum becomes a round construction. And there is an attic, and finally a rotunda on the top. This rotunda, as you see, has another colonnade all around, like a tholos. These are some of the proposals we can find in literature. It's, they date, there are so many reconstructions about the mausoleum. Really, it is, we don't lack of fantasy in these reconstructions. Beginning from the one from Labaco, that is 1552, very early, when the first studies on Roman architecture, Labaco wrote a book that was very successful about monuments of Rome. Maybe it was the first one. And then there are others, up to we get to Hulsen and Borgatti, that is at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, when they proposed a more scientific reconstruction. And then appears in 1925, he wrote a very nice article trying to go through the architecture with very good observations. However, I'm sorry, this, okay. Regarding the interior, the reconstruction are more treated with more fantasy. Beginning with Piranesi, he just invents everything. And this is it's quite a number, because Piranesi is always a very good source for observation on ancient monuments. And in this case, we clearly understand that he's not understanding the original structure, and most probably this has to be related with the fact that it was a castle and that he could not look very well to the details of the construction. So, the point is, let's go through its architecture. We know that there is a foundation that is 7 meters deep. This is made of concrete, like the usual building technique in Rome. Above this was built a kind of boundary wall made of concrete faced with brick. This boundary wall, I suppose it was built just to limit the area where the mausoleum had to be built and protect it from the floods of the river. That was a major issue in Rome, as you know. And then there is the first part of the circular construction that is within the square basement. And above this, at the very center of this, we have a tower. This tower is the tower where it has inside the burial chamber. Around the tower, there was a kind of first ring of concrete that was larger, and then a thinner one, another ring of concrete. All this was needed to keep the feeling of earth that was between the tower and the outer rings. On the very top, there was this rotunda. Finally, there was the exterior construction and the roof construction that was made with ashlar masonry. And as you see, there was a cavity between the boundary concrete wall and the outer ashlar masonry. That is the very famous one that is drawn in the Renaissance, and we know much information about the decoration. All this stands inside the present-day castle. Regarding the interior of the mausoleum, we have, from the entrance, there is a spiral staircase that goes up and leads to the level of the burial chamber that is placed exactly at the very center of the construction. And then there are some air shafts that are needed for the ventilation of the ramp. And finally, on the very top, there is another itinerary that is within the rotunda, that is also preserved. That is the one that goes on the very top of the rotunda. All this, the red one, is still preserved. What we don't know is the part that is highlighted in yellow. And we will get to this very soon. So, the entrance corridor ends with an atrium, and from the atrium it is possible to go up through the spiral staircase, and there are the ventilation shafts. Once you reach the upper level, that is to say, up to this moment, everything is very clear. We can clearly see the Roman structure and understand how was the original architecture. Once you get on the upper level, the things are a little bit more difficult. We have, of course, the burial chamber that stands in the inside. You can pass through it, and it's very clear. It's a square construction. Above this, today there is a kind of middle chamber that was reused in the castle, but it was a room that was not accessible. And then finally, on the top, there was the rotunda. The very critical point is what happens when the spiral staircase, the spiral ramp, gets to the end of its itinerary. It arrives to a place that is highlighted in red, in the square red part, and this has, above this area, there is an air shaft similar to the others, but have some very important differences. As you can see in the picture, there are some kind of recesses in the indentations in the masonry, is ashlar masonry, but this is not travertine like all the other parts that are built in ashlar masonry in the mausoleum, but are made of marble, white marble. This is very special because marble was used in the mausoleum only for architectural decoration, not for construction. So this gives evidence to something very special. If we look to the indentations, we can clearly see that there are the holes of the dowels. That means that blocks of marble were removed in a later time to be reused. So the original architecture of this place was rather different from the one we see today when we enter inside. This is a picture that shows the present day condition. There is an opening you see that is highlighted in with the dotted line. This is a later opening. There was a proposal to see this opening like the spiral ramp continuing from this side going up to the very top. However, this is not possible because this opening, if you see here the blue part, it's the lower part here has concrete, so it is quite impossible to continue with another ramp in this area. And there are also above, all around here, there are the imprints of the ashlar masonry that was removed. So what comes out? It comes out that in this area there was another vestibule that was all built with marble ashlar masonry. That was the end of the itinerary coming from the entrance and reaching a very important point. This point was exactly the point that on one side you could go through to the burial chamber, the red part that is highlighted there, and the burial chamber is this one highlighted there. So from one side you could go just in this direction, but then comes the point. What happened? You could not follow this part to go up, so we have to look for a continuation of this itinerary. This is the crucial point where all the people who have dealt with the mausoleum have tried to find a solution that is absolutely crucial for the understanding. If we look on the opposite side to the corridor leading to the burial chamber, we can see that there is a kind of barrel vault construction. This is inclined. It goes towards the outside of the mausoleum and has an inclined e-post. So it's a kind of inclined corridor going outside. And more, we have even another important evidence that here there is a kind of niche that was excavated in sometimes later, that where we have evidence of a step. So it comes out that one of the critical and difficult points of this for the understanding of the mausoleum is very clear. There was a marble vestibule that was at the end of the itinerary leading to the place where you could go either to the burial chamber or to the upper part of the mausoleum. It was a vestibule that has a particular importance in the architecture because it was the hinge of all the system. From one part, you could go where the dead emperors laid, and in the other part, you could go to the temple that was dedicated to them. So this is one of the points we have reached. However, looking at the outside of the mausoleum, there is, maybe we could turn off some of the light here because I see that maybe some images are not very clear.
I think we'll need to leave the lights on for the filming.
Oh, I see, okay, perfect. No, that doesn't work.
Much better for us.
Yeah.
Could you turn, I think it will destroy the film if you have as well.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
But it's not possible to just light the part of. Okay.
That's too much.
I'm sorry for this, but I am just. But I can show here, on the facade of the mausoleum, there is something that was not noticed. That is to say, if we have an inclined staircase going outside, of course, the Roman masonry is not existing. There was a kind of passage. And if we look at the very present-day masonry, we clearly see that there is a walling of an opening that was made in later times. This is very clear when you go there. And especially, it is very interesting to see, this is one of the famous drawings that were made by Ghirlandaio and Giuliano da Sangallo. They are two similar drawings that they show the mausoleum as it was in 1492. And it's very interesting source. We can see here in this side part of the original ashlar masonry marble cladding of the square basement that was removed and covered after the interventions of Paul III in the 1500s. But what we see here is a detail that is very interesting. Look at this. Here we see there is an opening. And this opening is exactly the opening of the staircase that was from the vestibule was going towards the outside. What happened? At present, the masonry is preserved to this level. All this is missing. And of course, we have evidence of a step here, but all the other part and part of this wall, all the other part is lost. So what happened? Why was this destroyed? This is the point. There is a very critical point in the history of Rome when the popes went to Avignon. This was in 1300s, and in around 1378, a pope was elected and was an Italian one, and he was in Rome. But then the conclave said, after a couple of weeks, said, no, we are wrong. we want a French one. So there was began the so-called schism of the Western Schism. It's a period that lasted around 30 years, in which there were popes and anti-popes. The French party had the Castel Sant'Angelo, the castle, and Italians didn't want them. So they were hardly fighting to make them go away from Castel Sant'Angelo. That was the fortress of Rome. At that time, they attacked the Castel Sant'Angelo, and the French, for the first time in the history of Rome, they bombarded Rome, and they destroyed all around. This was a shocking event, and was followed 1 year later with a battle, the so-called Battle of Marino, that is out of Rome, it's a village out of Rome, where the Italian party won the French one, and the French one left the castle. At this time, we know from the sources that the Romans began to demolish the mausoleum or the castle. So we know from the sources that some work was done to demolish the castle. Soon after, in 1390, was elected Boniface IX, who was the one who decided to preserve the castle. And he made many restoration works, and he fortified even more the castle with Niccolò Lamberti. He was a Renaissance architect, famous for the fortifications, and he made new additions. One of these new additions, most probably, is the one that was to repair the part that were demolished. But which were this part? Of course, my suggestion is that the part that was demolished was the staircase that was going up to the top of the castle. Demolishing the staircase, the castle could not be used anymore for defense, because you could not reach the upper part. And this was the only way to go to the top of the castle. So, as an evidence of these repairs, today there is still, at present day, there is a staircase here that goes like this, that is called the staircase of Boniface IX, that is the one that was built after the original staircase was demolished. All this was completely modified under Alexander VI at the end of the 1400s, when he made major works in the castle, and he created the one, all of you supposedly have been in Castel Sant'Angelo, and then at a certain point you get to this diametral ramp that goes from one side to the other of the castle and breaks the funeral chamber, and you don't understand what's going on. It's really has very modified in a very strong way the original layout, and is this that makes even harder the understanding. But this modification made unuseful the staircase that was done by Boniface IX. And today, when you get from the spiral ramp or from outside, you go out up through this ramp and you reach the top. But this was not the original. Coming to the upper part, there is, I said that there was a kind of middle chamber that was just above the burial chamber. This chamber has been, it has been suggested that it was another burial chamber. This is impossible, because there is evidence that this passageway and the one opposite to this that give access to this room, they have been cut into the Roman masonry. So the yellow one are headers and stretchers that have been demolished to create the passageway. So originally, this room was not accessible. There was an ashlar wall all around, and it was covered by concrete barrel vault. And this concrete barrel vault was most probably built and made inaccessible. That is to say, the scaffoldings and the centering was left inside. Once you get the level of this chamber is this one. Originally, that is the courtyard when you reach the top of the castle. Originally, the situation was really very different. As we can see, here is the chamber that was located in the middle of the structure, and all this was filled with earth. That is to say that it was a part that was remodeled when the castle, when came out the transformations with the castle. What was it used for, this middle chamber? My suggestion is that this was created to raise the rotunda to the level that made it possible to be seen from the opposite side of the bridge. And here we come to the point that the bridge and the mausoleum were built together, so they were part of one project. Today, here, we have in red the mausoleum, in gray the castle, and the parts that match red and gray, that is this velvet color, these are the parts that survive from the mausoleum. As you can see from the reconstruction, the mausoleum is preserved up to the top. So, I hope one day we have the chance to visit together, because I know that it's very hard to follow all this on a PowerPoint. It's much easier to go through and see that on site. But if you go up, before getting to the very beautiful terrace that is on the very top, you see all Rome. The last present for the ones who love Roman masonry is that there is a brick facing of the corridor, that is the original corridor. It's a spiral staircase that was used to get to the very top of the rotunda. However, today the rotunda has a rather different layout, because it has been divided in two chambers, and the upper vault, the dome that was on the top of this, is not the original one, because in 1497 the thunder shot the tower, and it exploded because there was the gunpowder inside. This is like the Parthenon. It's the history is always the same. But this time it was God, and it was not Morosini to do that. And so, we are now, I suppose, quite familiar with what happens inside the mausoleum. But what was the outside of this construction? In the outside, we can clearly see that the lower part of the castle, we have all the Roman concrete, and there is a small part of the original ashlar masonry that was a kind of construction enveloping the concrete construction. We can clearly see that there are at least differences in the treatment of the masonry and of the concrete, but the most important one is this one. In this level, we see that we don't have remains of the stone wall. There is only concrete without any imprint of the stones that were removed. And this is absolutely important, because it gives evidence to the existence of a colonnade around the lower part of the mausoleum. You have to think that present-day concrete structures, Roman structures, get to this level. But the upper part is not visible, because there is all the brick facing made by Alexander VI at the end of 1400s. What is clear is that in this side, the lower part of the rotunda was at this level, while in the upper part, above this layer of travertine, it is recessed. So what comes out that at this level, there was a barrel vault coming out that is very similar to the Temple of Hadrian in Campus Martium, where there are the columns that are still surviving with the vault above them. So it was a very similar layout. It's interesting to see that there is a very nice drawing in Galleria delle Stampe of the Uffizi Museum in Florence, made by Sallustio Peruzzi. Sallustio Peruzzi was the son of a most famous architect of the Renaissance, that is Baldassare Peruzzi, famous also for his projects for the St. Peter's, between others. He was, however, Sallustio Peruzzi made this drawing that is very interesting because it's a kind of study reconstruction of the mausoleum. And this stops with doesn't show the upper part of the mausoleum, but clearly shows all that we have been saying: the spiral ramps, the colonnade, and the system of the square basement. Unfortunately, he didn't suggest what was going on the upper part. And Antonio Labacco, who was a scholar of his father, he made, as I said earlier, that it was the first who published a book on the reconstruction of Roman buildings in 1552, and it was a very successful book. It was printed and was all around, but as you see, it's clearly inspired to the drawing by Sallustio Peruzzi, but the upper part, there is a lantern. This is St. Peter's, it's not a mausoleum, of course. So here is important because this is the beginning of a period of reconstructions that are made based on fantasy. Very fantasy is on the reconstruction of Bartoli, who imagines something like a dome construction on the very top, a kind of spiral staircase to go up, and so on. And there are others and others and others. And the memory of the mausoleum was completely lost. And I suppose that Sallustio Peruzzi had evidence from other architects from 1400s that they knew much more than what was visible after the modifications made by Alexander VI. So Alexander VI is the one who creates this crack in the history of the mausoleum, and since then we lose information and understanding of the mausoleum. So this is today, and this impressive. This was how it was. At least this is my suggestion. As you can see from this reconstruction, seen from close side, this not the front view, the rotunda is a little bit hidden from the attic that stands above the colonnade, because the rotunda was very little, and above all, it didn't have a colonnade around. I could prove that because I found evidence inside the modifications made by Paul III of one of the foundations of the rotunda, and there is no space to create a colonnade that would need a foundation that doesn't exist. So the rotunda was like a very simple round building, and the very simple round building, and this excited very much Filippo Quarelli, of course, is the Pantheon. So it's a project that since the beginning Hadrian wanted to add at the very top of the building, of his mausoleum, something dedicated to the cult of the emperors. And this is the big difference with the program made by Augustus some 140 years before. To conclude this reconstruction, I have to highlight that in my reconstruction there is a very hypothetical exterior volume that this is truly hypothetical. I say it really clearly. All that have been saying is based on the evidence. This is hypothetical. And this, I think it's fine when we propose some reconstruction to declare what is hypothetical and what not. This, however, is based on the fact that we have many consecration coins that depict the pyres for consecratio of the emperors. And usually, here, on the second story, there is always a false door. This false door is very common in funeral architecture. It is the false door dedicated to the dead to go up. It's in the Etruscan funerary monuments in Roman, and also in the Hellenistic ones, of course. And one that is very close, has some similarities with the Mausoleum of Hadrian, is the so-called Mausoleum de la Chrétienne in Mauritania. Is the one who has also a spiral corridor that leads to the funeral chamber, very similar to the one in the Mausoleum of Hadrian. And all of them, they usually display a false door. So it is most probable that here on the first story we have like a volume coming out and highlighting the presence of the false door. Inside this volume, we have to imagine there was the staircase that was leading to the top. So this was how it looked, the mausoleum from the opposite side of the river. And as you can see, the rotunda was visible in its entirety, exactly since it was given a higher level than the cornice of the attic. This is the reconstruction, and this is the section. So, one thing that is very important to highlight is that the funeral chamber was not placed at the ground level like all the monuments and monumenta and all the mausoleums we know. It was placed to a higher level. This was possibly for a practical reason, against the floods of the river. We know in the Mausoleum of Augustus there were problems dealing with the floods of the river. But it was also inside the concept of the construction. The concept was that you could enter inside, you had a spiral staircase going up. This spiral staircase has no relation with the exterior. So when you go through this spiral staircase, you lose your orientation. You don't know where you are. So you get into, but as in the Mausoleum de la Chrétienne, there is the same spiral staircase that is on one level. In the Mausoleum of Hadrian, since it goes up, you also lose reference in the height. You are out of the world. You are into an inner world. From this, you could go up also always without having facing the exterior. So it was a kind of an interior itinerary without contactless with the exterior. And only once you reached the very top, you could see the rotunda. That was the place dedicated to the cult of the emperor. So we reach the conclusions. The first conclusion is that, as we saw the drawing, the reconstruction made by Filarete in 1445 was correct. Apart, of course, from the upper colonnade that was here. But in 1445, they knew exactly which was the original layout of the mausoleum. The second is the hypothetical location of a volume in this area that was useful for the itineraries, but also for the false door in the main facade. Then the rotunda didn't have a colonnade, as we can see in many reconstructions also by Hudson. And of course, this is very important, there was only one burial chamber. The most important part, I highlight this because I think that is very important, is that there was this marble vestibule that was located exactly in the point where you could go or to the burial chamber where lie the dead, or to the top where the dead was a god. Thank you very much.